Okay, so let me start with my last talk, and I have really the pleasure that I can rely on what Luigi said and especially Harold said in this. In fact, and I must also say, I'm with Colin that technical debt is something that is not very clear what it really means. My approach to it, actually, as you will see, is from a very practical nature, and this is because I have a longer history of doing software development and later quality management and so on. And the point was that in the early 80s, I invented a software counting method, which worked very well and helped us to do the estimations right for all our custom projects. And in the 90s, I had the pleasure to experience the same as Harold showed us about the process, the project success rate, namely within a year, we simply came to an over 90%, actually 98% success rate, green rate in projects, simply because we started to do estimations for the project already with IFBook before we offered the project to our customers, and that helped the company within a year to come into the green area. So I'm just wondering why people still does not do it by, I mean, there are a lot of things you don't understand on world. This world here that I'll show you, this is where I live. Okay, and this is the goal of this presentation. I mean, Agile is no longer new, it's 20 years old, but still there are some questions. Should we do a function pound counting only at the beginning and the end, or should we do it concurrently with each sprint? And my answer naturally is with each sprint, and I hope after my 20 minutes you'll be persuaded that we should do that. Because naturally the requirements change continuously, and what I also want to point out is removing technical debt adds value, and what's best, we can measure technical debt, at least if you do it like it's in my definition, namely on a very practical and engineering type level. So that's the goal. That's the agenda. We start with monitoring sprints. First of all, when monitoring sprints, I always use these data movement maps or the transaction maps for IFBook. I use actually more IFBook than Cosmic because most projects that I can go with actually can help with and support are transactional in nature, and then we prefer to use the IFBook model. But for the sake of a presentation, I think Cosmic is basically simpler to understand, and the example that I show you here was actually measured with Cosmic, and because it was an app development on mobile app. You know, all know Cosmic, I don't have to repeat it. You show a model, and what's important, this model you share with the team, because otherwise you cannot explain why, what does it mean, what is a data movement, and it's not exactly, if you really want, according to the manual in all aspects, at least Charles Simon said, well, it's an approximation. Nevertheless, it's very useful. The project that I was looking at, that I show you, did actually happen about 7 years ago. And I just wanted to say a little bit what happened in the sprints. We started with 2 user stories from backlog, added 2 new user stories that weren't known before, then came to an andante. So you start with a vision, more or less. Then came the scherzo, everybody was happy. Oh, is internet connection stable still? Can you hear me? Hope you do. Then came the Marche Funèbre, and that happened because at that time it wasn't clear how to use an app with a camera. Everybody thought, okay, we use the camera to make, for instance, a photo and to scan it in order to get information. In this case, it was about bills. And today, cameras actually are used to immediately share all the images you make to all the community and your followers. And if you, for instance, use that in a banking environment, story about scanning, and then came an intermezzo sprint with removing technical debt, a menuetto with still 3 new user stories, and the finale, final tests. If you look after this with a functional sizing method, in this case Cosmic, in the beginning, your PDR perfect, your productivity excellent. Then came the sprint 4 with the Marche Funèbre, and you had to do fixes, so the progress was cut into half. Then came a sprint number 5 where they didn't do anything else than removing technical debt. Naturally, you could argue you should never actually admit technical debt, but we'll see. Sometimes you cannot avoid it, and sometimes you don't want to avoid it. And if you look after then the product size grow, you see that the product then is then the function points actually, or the functionality actually delivered, that had a tendency to slow down from sprint 1 to the sprint 7 to final. Sprint 7 and final is the same. No, it's not the same. Initially, before sprint 7, it was quite near to the final, but you see that was only just no longer growing. And actually, this small example, or what we should actually point out in this example, the story points count of the team remained always stable. And in fact, in this case, for 7 sprints, you can probably have your team stable without much interruptions, and in this case, not even with vacations in between. But what's important is to say, well, from the initial 8 user stories, we implemented 7. 1 user story was then translated into several new user stories, and 13 new user stories popped up during the sprints, but not only functional. So that's the overall view. Obviously, if you only look after the story points, you don't get the real image, because this is the real image of what you do and what the progress is. And sometimes it's always definitely better to know what you're doing and to measure what you're doing and not just believing that you're doing something important. If you go, that was an actual project with, in this case, it was with 90 sprints. It ended up with 110 sprints of 2 weeks each. So you can imagine it is more than two years that it lasted. And they actually produced quite a nice logarithmic curve in product growth. Their delivered function points per sprint remained always relatively stable, but the product didn't grow anymore. And the reason why is more and more what they had to do was removing technical debt. So for managers, it looks like a decrease of functional productivity, but it's not, because this refactoring that we need becomes more frequent, you can't add much more new functionality to the product, even if you measure it with Cosmic, where you don't have this effect automatically by the measurement method. But the point is, you refine or you change your requirements. That is, your old user stories, you take them, you have them implemented, okay, but you have to change them a little bit, adapt them a little bit to to new insights or to a better understanding of the problem. About technical debt, I mean, the point is that especially if you're in industry, you often need to do a product, a minimum viable product fast. And in this case that I showed before, it was also true for administrative in the government environment. They had to produce releases fast, because otherwise they were no longer, they didn't have the necessary support for a 2.5-year product. So removing technical debt is not something that you can easily omit, but that you have to take into account. So for this question is, how do we measure technical debt? Let me first recall a little bit about the definition of done. Most agile teams, and those that I'm referring to especially, had the policy that they say, we do not allow any bugs in code. That is obviously true, or can only be true for unit testing. It means green bar on the Chai unit. Means I see there is a raise hand. Let me check. And do it easily. View. No, I don't see it. Okay, let me continue. We hope Pierre is helping me then later with the questions. So one of the things that I experience often is that they do say reviewing their user stories before they go into development in a refinement meeting to make sure that they have done the requirement solicitation, that they really are ready for development, that any questions how they relate to other user stories are solved. And then you probably can get it more or less like this, that with the acceptance criteria, you don't leave any bugs in the release code. naturally, until you come to the integration part where you still probably will find some bugs which you couldn't catch up with unit testing. So this as a backup, there is still something which is called the code smell. The code smell characteristic in the source code of a program that possibly indicates a deeper problem. This you can measure, for instance, with SonarCube or other code quality measurement systems. Technical debt happens sometimes without the team being aware. That is, from after some time you feel it, because say after a security boot, a new one, you see that you used a method that is not safe, or you weren't aware of it, or a known technical debt that has been made because you knew that this is something you should do better, but at the moment it works like this, and this is for a moment good enough, and you have the deadline to meet, and the targeted technical debt. There is then something that you do on purpose, but which is servicing the development team. And then the fellow buddy, big ball of mud, if you just do agile development without giving enough considerations to the architecture, you probably end up like this poor boy on the right. But in essence, what we can say, the development team is the source of reporting of technical debt. And how can they do that? So my approach is actually one is definitely the code smell metric, but code smell is something that you need a technical customer who's well enough with things like code smell and can value that. But the development team, they can report technical debt. And this is how we do it in this case. We use the model, the simple model that we have seen in the beginning. And here we just add the classifications which come from the ISPEC repository, namely whether we do something adding a new development, changing a new development, or deleting new development, adding, delete, change from an enhancement. And we use then the redevelopment for technical debt. But sometimes you do the redevelopment because you have new requirements. The criteria is if you do refactoring or redevelopment without having new requirements, then it's technical debt. Then it counts as technical debt. And as soon as we can do that in a model, it is easy. Bug fixes are not counted. Then you can actually use the ISP benchmark, but not the release 10. This is 10 years old or so. But it was the numbers that I got just from them. And you know the PDRs for just various classifications, 9 classifications. And that is, you can, using cost estimation, you can actually calculate the monetary value of your sprints. Naturally, what should you do with this monetary value? I always believe that that transparency is the best way of doing anything which is in the technical area. Hiding difficulties and hiding technical debt is, in my view, not an option. And sometimes you can even agree with your customer that you allow for a certain number of technical debt, which you remove later, and you may even get paid for removing technical debt if the contract is looking at this. In this case, for instance, Sprint 7, you could easily change from the PDRs to money, but well, I probably must say the euro value here is lower than ever, even from a Swiss point of view. But you can make removal of technical debt explicit in a contract if you want, and if the customer is interested, for instance, more to have a minimal viable product first before you really go into the finalization of a product. So this is my talk. I think we have time for a few conclusions. And first of all, I hope that you agree to me, Agile development must be monitored sprint by sprint, not just at the beginning and at the end, but you should actually see what happens. And this is, in my view, an engineering approach. Measure what you do and just do not stay with any belief. You can let managers believe something, but engineers do not believe they measure. Agile metrics that do not include functional size are simply nonsense, even if I also agree that, say, this planning poker where you discuss how many story points is some user story, they are very helpful and they are very important for communication and also naturally to do sprint planning right. But you cannot always, you don't have only functional user stories. You have non-functional user stories which need effort but do not contribute to functional size. But those that change functional size because it means you actually refactor something without having new requirements, simply because you say, from a technical point of view, I want to have higher quality, especially for maintenance, then this can be measured too, and it's simple, especially if you do it really in an agile team, together with an agile team, and say immersed into development. So that's basically what I wanted to say. And now we come to any questions.
Thanks a lot, Thomas. Very interesting to hear your presentation. Let's have a look. I can't see, we haven't got any questions so far, but the audience, if you have anyone, just you can put them in the Q&A or just open up your microphone and get them there. So let's see what will happen. Now let's see, there was something. It was from Colin.
Oh, thanks.
He enjoyed your presentation as well.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Great.
I mean, we could still discuss this idea of having technical debt paid. My reviewer, I think it was Harold, mentioned that we should always try to deliver absolutely ideal code.
Yeah.
And I do not see that. This is also a very old story, but once we made a company fly, really, they became then a world leader in their area, simply because we delivered the software within 5 days, working days, with 100 function points. And the software was able to address their main issues. They worked with that for 3 months in a lab, and after 3 months they came up with an with a specification what they really need, that had 1,000 function points.
Yeah.
And we implemented that, and when we delivered it, probably 3 months later, then they made it compulsory for all their suppliers that they use our software product to before they can supply. It was a very nice thing, because after that we just had to manage our sales.
But Thomas, you were mentioning me as being the reviewer, and yeah, that is correct. You know, we are also working in the Netherlands on a new standard about the contracting of output-based contracting of agile teams. More than 50 organizations are working on this, so many people are working on this initiative. And the idea is that you put the right metrics in the contract, output-based metrics, of course, function point-based metrics, but also technical metrics like technical debt, but especially the ISO 5055 rules for, okay, what should the programmer do or not do. So, and if you follow those rules, then you won't have too much technical debt. That's why we say, okay, if you can avoid the technical debt in the first place. And that's of course a bit difficult in Agile, because yeah, you have this definition of done and you really want to complete your sprint in a good way. So sometimes you maybe are out of time and you have to take a shortcut, but then yeah, you have to realize that technical debt is building up and it comes back on the backlog, and then just like you have to plan a complete sprint to get rid of it. Yeah, that happens. Yeah, but in Netherlands we're working on this standard, and once we have it, we also want it to become an ISO standard, so it gets more more available to the industry.
It addresses then the measurement, also the metrics on the technical level for software.
Yeah, so there are technical metrics, there are functional metrics, there are also metrics about customer happiness, right? And there are a couple more. I think in the end it will be like 50 metrics that you can put in your contract. And the basic advice also, because now, of course, as you know, a lot of contracts are based on time material. So you pay the supplier by making more hours, which is basically not very productive usually. And the idea is, if you have a price per function point, for instance, then it's a win-win situation, because if you want more functionality, okay, it's logical, you have to pay more. And for the supplier, if they find some way to get the best effective productivity in the team, their margin will be the highest. So that's basically what we're working on there.
Thank you. Yeah.
Sure.